Are really worried. The Minister has said more than once that there isn't a shortage, but can I gently say to her that is not the experience of many of my constituents, and they don't need her to simply refer to that as a supply issue.
Since 2015, this kind and generous country has welcomed nearly 450,000 people through safe and legal routes. The British people are eager to help those in need, and they support controlled migration. They have opened their homes to refugees, but they do not want open borders. For decades, they were told that this was immoral and that their concerns and opinions didn't matter. Even today, we see from certain quarters an unhealthy contempt for anyone who wants controlled migration. Such an attitude is unhelpful, Mr. Speaker. Moreover, it's fanciful. We do not have infinite capacity. Already, we are struggling to accommodate new arrivals, meaning we spend millions every day in hotel bills alone. We cannot tolerate people coming here illegally. It is not legitimate to leave a safe country like France to seek asylum in the United Kingdom. And we have to break the business model of the people smuggling gangs. Their trade in human cargo is evil and lethal, as we were tragically reminded very recently. There is a global migration crisis, and it requires international solutions. In April, my right honourable friend, the member for Whittam, backed by my right honourable friend, the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, signed a groundbreaking migration and economic development partnership with Rwanda, and they deserve enormous credit for their work on this. We agreed that people who come to the UK via dangerous, illegal and unnecessary means can be relocated to Rwanda to have their asylum claims considered there. Those in need of protection will be given up to 5 years of support, including education and employment training, along with help with integration, accommodation and healthcare. Being relocated to Rwanda is not a punishment, but an innovative way of addressing a major problem to redress the imbalance between illegal and legal migration routes. It will also ensure that those in genuine need of international protection are provided with it in Rwanda. It is a humane and practical alternative for those who come here through dangerous, illegal and unnecessary routes. And by making it clear that they cannot expect to stay in the UK, we will deter more people from coming here and make such routes unviable. There has been a great deal of misinformation about Rwanda. I visited Rwanda myself several years ago. She's a state party to the 1951 United Nations Refugee Convention and the 7 core United Nations Human Rights Conventions. It is a safe and dynamic country with a thriving economy. It has an excellent record of supporting refugees and vulnerable migrants. The UN has used Rwanda for the relocation of vulnerable migrants from Libya, and this was first funded by the European Union. Many migrants, including refugees, have already built excellent lives in Rwanda, and our partnership is a significant investment in that country and further strengthens our relationship. A myth still persists that the Home Office Permanent Secretary opposed this agreement. For the record, he did not. Nor did he assert that it is definitely poor value for money. He stated in his role as accounting officer that the policy is regular, proper and feasible, but there is not currently sufficient evidence to demonstrate value for money. As he would be the first to agree, it's for ministers to take decisions, having received official advice. And once the partnership is up and running, he will continue to monitor its efficacy, including value for money. Now, in June, the first plane was ready to relocate people to Rwanda. Our domestic courts, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court upheld our right to send the flight. However, following an order by an out-of-hours judge in the European Court of Human Rights, the flight was cancelled. The European Court of Human Rights did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but it prohibited the removal of specific people. This was a without notice order, and the UK was not invited to make representations to oppose it. Mr. Speaker, as a result, we've been unable to operate relocation flights pending ongoing legal proceedings. However, we have continued to prepare by issuing notices of intent for those eligible for relocation. And my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, recently outlined a comprehensive new approach to illegal migration. Now, a judicial review was brought against the Rwanda partnership by a number of organisations and individual asylum seekers. The first part of proceedings considered a case that the partnership is unlawful. Part 2 argued that UK domestic processes under the partnership were unfair. And Part 3 that the policy is contrary to data protection laws. Today, the High Court, in a judgment spanning over 130 pages, Lord Justice Lewis and Mr. Justice Swift held that it is indeed lawful for the government to make arrangements for relocating asylum seekers to Rwanda and for their asylum claims to be determined in Rwanda rather than in the United Kingdom. The court held further that the relocation of asylum seekers to Rwanda is consistent with the Refugee Convention and with the statutory and other legal obligations upon the government, including obligations imposed by the Human Rights Act. Mr. Speaker, this judgment thoroughly vindicates the Rwanda partnership. Yeah. I spoke earlier today with my Rwandan counterpart, the Rwanda Minister Vincent Biruta, and we both confirmed our joint and steadfast resolve to deliver this partnership at scale as soon as possible. It's what the overwhelming majority of the British people want to see happen. The sooner it is up and running, the sooner we will break the business model of the evil gangs and bring an end to these illegal, unnecessary and unsafe channel crossings. Now that our courts have affirmed its legality, I invite the opposition to get behind this plan. Yeah. And I commend this statement to the House.
Yeah. I call the Shadow Home Secretary of Ecuador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has failed to stop criminal gangs putting lives at risk and proliferating along our borders. They failed to prosecute or convict the gang members, and they failed to take basic asylum decisions, which are down by 40% in the last 6 years. And instead of sorting those problems out, they have put forward an unworkable, unethical, extremely expensive Rwanda plan, which risks making trafficking worse. Yeah. Now, the Home Secretary describes today's court judgment as a vindication. I have to wonder whether she has read it, because it sets out evidence of serious problems in Home Office decision-making, identifies significant financial costs of this scheme, and also very limited numbers of people who will be covered, and certainly no evidence that this will act as a deterrent or address the serious problems that we face. The court concluded that the Home Office decision-making in each of the 8 cases considered was so flawed and chaotic that those individual decisions have had to be quashed. Literally cases of mixing up evidence and names in individual cases, so they were making decisions on the wrong people, confusion between teams in Glasgow and in Croydon about who was deciding what and which information should be shared, evidence of torture and trafficking not considered, and we know too that the Home Office attempted to send heavily pregnant women to Rwanda. Now, this is a damning indictment of the decision-making process in the Home Office, which we know isn't working because 98% of the small boat arrivals in the last 12 months have had no decision at all. And where government ministers seem to have effectively decided they are so incapable of getting a grip on the asylum system and taking asylum decisions effectively here in the UK, they want to pay a country halfway across the world to take those decisions for us. Now, on the lawfulness of the decision, the court accepted that Rwanda doesn't have asylum processing capacity, including interpreters or legal support, to take these decisions, but it's concluded the agreement is still lawful because of two key things: that the number of people Rwanda takes will be very limited, and that there will be lots more money provided by the UK government. The Home Secretary didn't tell us about any of those things. So can she now tell us how many people does she expect to send to Rwanda next year? Rwanda has said it can accommodate 200 people. That is 0.5% of this year's Channel crossings. The Home Office itself has said there's no evidence it will act as a deterrent and that it is unenforceable and has a high risk of fraud. Secondly, can she tell us the full cost? The court said there will be significant additional funding provided. The government's already written Rwanda 2 cheques this year, one for £120 million, another this summer for £20 million. Millions more are promised. So how much more? And how much is this going to end up costing per person? Because it looks like over £1 million per person at the moment. And third, the court judgment says there's no evidence the UK government sought to investigate either the terms of the Rwanda-Israel agreement or the way it had worked in practice. Why on earth not? Because that agreement was abandoned with evidence that it had increased trafficking and the activity of criminal gangs. Convictions for people smuggling have already dropped by 75% in the space of 2 years. Convictions for people trafficking are already pitifully low, and a former chief constable has warned the Borders Act will make that worse. Time and again, the government is failing to tackle the criminal gangs who are driving this or to make them pay the price. So instead of this unworkable, unethical, extortionately expensive and deeply damaging policy, the government should be using this investment to go after the gangs who are putting lives at risk. Time and again, all they are doing is chasing headlines, and these are distractions, damaging distractions from the serious hard work to tackle the gangs and sort out the asylum system. The Home Secretary has said that the Conservatives are in last chance saloon. It is their policies that have put them there and that have let the country down, always ramping up the rhetoric, never doing the serious hard work or common sense. Britain deserves better than this. Britain is better than this.
Yeah, Secretary.
I'm very disappointed by the response from the Shadow Home Secretary, and more actually concerned that she's actually seeking to go behind what is a legitimate decision by our independent judiciary, set out rigorously, exhaustively, thoroughly, and suggests that this is still an illegitimate scheme. We've seen through this judgment that this is now lawful on several grounds. The judgment looked at the legislative authority. It looked very closely about the claims as to whether it breached Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 14 of the ECHR, Article 31 of the Refugee Convention. It looked very closely about whether it was fair and or whether access to justice was respected. It looked very closely at other public law grounds. And on all of those claims, the Home Office won. The court concluded that it was lawful, that it is lawful for the government to make arrangements for relocating asylum seekers to Rwanda and for their asylum claims to be determined in Rwanda rather than the UK. And that judgment is a comprehensive analysis of the reasons why. The Honourable Ryan Roulet does ask about the 8 individual cases, and we accept the judgment of the court on those individual cases. We have already taken steps to strengthen the case working process, including by revising the information and the guidance given to individuals during their assessment for relocation. But we've been clear throughout that no one will be relocated if it is unsafe for them, and support is offered to individuals throughout the process to ensure that it is fair and robust. But, Mr. Speaker, the simple truth here is that Labour have opposed every one of our efforts to deter illegal migration. They've opposed the Nationality and Borders Act. They've opposed life sentences against people smugglers. They've opposed the removal of foreign national offenders, including drug dealers and rapists. All they offer is obstruction and criticism and performative politics of opposition and magical thinking. Because what do they actually offer. They say return to the failed Dublin scheme, no matter that it was ineffective, no matter that the EU doesn't want it. They want safe and legal routes as the answer, no matter that this government has done more than any other in recent history, offering sanctuary to over 450,000 people by safe and legal routes, no matter that they can't actually define what routes they would stand up themselves, no matter that our capacity is not unlimited, Mr. Speaker, and that there are over 100 million people displaced globally. Would Labour give them all a safe and legal route to the UK? Mr. Speaker, we cannot indulge in fictions. The fundamental reason that Labour can't articulate a plan is that they can't be honest. They can't be honest with the British public about what they really want. The Shadow Home Secretary couldn't even decide if she would repeal illegal entry, even though she voted against it. Their solution would be to turn our crisis of illegal migration into a crisis of legal migration. Open borders by the back door. Unlimited safe and legal routes is simply open borders masquerading as humanitarianism. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Prime Minister and I announced our plan to tackle small boats. Today, the court affirmed the legality of a central piece in that plan. And tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, Labour still won't have a plan.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although the High Court ruled that the Rwanda policy is lawful, there were, as has been said in that case, only 8 asylum claimants. Those cases have been all set aside by the court because they said at the same time in their ruling that the circumstances of each claimant had not been considered properly. The latest Home Office website figures currently show that there are over 160,000 such individual cases outstanding. Furthermore, as the Home Secretary, who I have the greatest confidence, stated, the European Court judge who issued the injunction clearly did so without proper consideration of the Rwanda policy, and such rulings do not command our respect. Does my right honourable friend accept that for all these reasons it becomes more essential than ever to apply the notwithstanding formula to the new legislation which the Prime Minister has now announced in mid-January, which must also distinguish in our own law between genuine refugees and illegal economic migrants, not only in the interests of saving life, but also preventing organised criminality, but in also asserting UK parliamentary sovereignty, overriding the European Convention, and at the same time dealing comprehensively with the current backlog of those 160,000 outstanding asylum cases in that legislation.
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point, and what I want to be clear about is that the European Court of Human Rights did not rule on the lawfulness of our policy. It did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but it did nonetheless prohibit the removal of the individuals on the 14th of June flight via interim and injunctive relief. We have a proud tradition of defending fundamental rights in this country, and we will always retain a robust approach to protecting and preserving human rights. However, that does not mean that we will have a migration system that can be abused and exploited by those who don't have legitimate claims to be here. And as the Prime Minister announced last week, we will be bringing forward legislation to ensure that we have a robust migration system and secure borders.
SNP spokesperson Alison Poulos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a dark day indeed with this judgment, and particularly when the Home Secretary comes here to imply that having morals is fanciful. Enver Solomon of the Refugee Council has called this decision this policy wrong in principle and unworkable in practice, and I am certain that this will go to appeal, as the charities and those involved in it have stated. In the SNP benches, we will never get behind this policy, not in our name. And I remind people in this House that slavery, apartheid and marital rape were all lawful at one time, but none of them were right. The court found that the Home Office failed to consider properly the circumstances of the 8 who challenged this policy. So can I ask the Home Secretary how exactly she will intend to approach these cases now? What happens to these 8 individuals? What happens also to the others who have already been issued with notices of intent? What confidence can they have in a system that didn't properly consider the cases of 8 people previously? The Home Secretary claims that this will be a deterrent. Well, the Tories also claim that the hostile environment would be a deterrent, that the Nationality and Borders Act would be a deterrent, and now the Rwanda policy will be a deterrent. None of them are working because they fail to recognise the very desperate circumstances that drive people to come here in the first place. Safe and legal routes will work and will prevent people losing their lives in the Channel. The Home Secretary in her statement talked about the trade in human cargo, and we all want to tackle the people smugglers that exploit people in the most vulnerable of circumstances. But I ask her, what else is this policy, this Rwanda policy, but state-sponsored people trafficking? Can I ask her how many people are actually going to be removed to Rwanda? It's going to be a tiny, tiny proportion, and therefore any deterrent effect that they claim is not going to be proper. Can I ask her the total cost, lastly, of this scheme as well? This is an unworkable scheme, because how much money has been spent on it already? How much of it has gone in the legal case? And how much would have been better spent dealing with the catastrophic backlog of cases that the Tories created?
Secretary.
Well, I'm afraid that the Honourable Lady's ideological zeal is blinding and preventing her from taking a rational approach. I'm very proud of the fact that we've welcomed 450,000 people through safe and legal routes to this country since 2015, and I don't think anyone can claim that we aren't forward-leaning on all of this. And I think that the Honourable Lady and her party really needs to be honest about their position with the British people. They stand for open borders and uncontrolled migration.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Parliament has legislated our courts abroad. We are apparently stopped by a Russian judge, woken from a bar to issue an injunction. Can this stand?
Well, as always, my right honourable friend makes a very powerful point, and I would just say that the Prime Minister, neither the Prime Minister or I are deterred from delivering upon this policy. It's an essential part of our wider plans to break the business model, to stop illegal migration. We have a legitimate basis for it. It has been upheld after being rigorously tested in our courts. We will continue to move quickly in order to honour the will of the British people.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary says that Britain has a proud tradition of supporting asylum seekers. That is true in part, but it's not true under her tenure. She is pursuing a vile policy which is brutal towards the individuals concerned and continually tells us that it is illegal to seek asylum. It is not. It is clearly there in all international conventions. Will she, for once, have a sense of humanity towards people who are desperate and are victims of wars, of environmental change, of human rights abuse, and exploited it to boot? Cannot she just hold out a hand of friendship and understanding towards these desperate people rather than this brutal assertion she's making today?
The right honourable gentleman keeps talking on a regular basis about safe and legal routes as being a means to an end of illegal arrivals. But the reality is that our safe and legal routes already have allowed 450,000 people to come here since 2015, 300,000 in the last year alone, the highest number that we've seen in several decades. But that needs to happen in conjunction with deterrent policies if they are to have any effect, and if we are to stop the practice of people taking lethal and unlawful journeys across the Channel, jumping the queue, undermining the British people's generosity and breaking the law.
Edward Lane.
Welcome. It won't solve the problem, not just because of the relatively few numbers that can be deported to Rwanda, but because each case must be fought individually, and human rights lawyers will fight every single case individually. That is the problem. Surely the only serious way we can deter migration across the Channel is to have the legal right not just to process people when they arrive on our shores, but to arrest them and detain them until their asylum application is dealt with. Now, is there anything in the Refugee Convention which stops us doing that? If there isn't, why aren't we doing it? And if it's a Human Rights Act that stops us doing it, can we not apply in our new legislation for a notwithstanding clause to deal with that problem?
Well, this is exactly why the Prime Minister announced last week, and I and the Immigration Minister are working intensively to prepare legislation which will be introduced next year, and it will deliver a scheme along the lines of what he's just described, whereby if you come here irregularly or illegally, i.e. on a small boat, putting yourself and others at risk, you will be detained and you will be swiftly removed to a safe third country or to Rwanda for your asylum claim to be processed.
Kevan Jones.
The Home Secretary, in a statement, confirmed that the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office had concerns about the cost and that she overruled him. Now, we've spent £140 million so far, and not one single individual has been removed. When the Honourable Member for Corby was the Immigration Minister, he said that the average cost of removing people will be £12,000, something that was not based on any fact. So if she's so confident about the scheme, she took a decision to overrule the Permanent Secretary. Will she not today publish all the costs of this scheme so that we can all take a view of whether it is a good use of taxpayers' money, or whether it's not, just simply a way of fulfilling one of her weird dreams?
The Honourable Gentleman needs to get his facts right, because actually the policy was, the agreement was struck between my predecessor, the right honourable friend, my right honourable friend, the member for Witham, and the Rwandan government. But I support the work that she did and the achievements that she struck, which is that that the agreement, it represents a long-term policy. It's expected to last for at least 5 years, and the costs and the payments will depend on the number of people relocated, the timing of when that happens, and the outcomes of the individual cases. Of course, we've been held up by litigation, and once the litigation process comes to an end, we will move quickly to deliver it and deliver value for money.
Natalie Elpheg.
I am saddened that following last week's tragic events, neither the Shadow Home Secretary or the SNP front bench are prepared to actually say that people should not be getting into these boats in the first place. They should be claiming refuge and asylum in one of the 149 convention countries, many of which they will have gone through. I welcome today's judgment from the High Court, but I ask my right honourable friend, that isn't it even better than Rwanda that people stay safe on land in France and do not take these crossings in the first place?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. People should not be making this journey. They should not be crossing through other safe countries, and they shouldn't be choosing to come to the United Kingdom via these means. And the sooner that we are able to deliver a policy that reflects that, the better.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The courts have been very clear. It is wrong to have a blanket approach to the treatment of refugees, just as it would be wrong to decide that everybody caught speeding could never drive again. What matters is treating each case on its merits. Now, we've seen already how poorly this government is treating children who are here, who are refugee children. The Home Secretary talks about being honest, so let's finally have some honest, straight answers. For avoidance of doubt, will the Home Secretary confirm whether or not she is intending to deport children or those who are looking after children who are here or refugees to Rwanda? Yes or no? Will children be on those flights, ministers?
Well, we've been very clear that families are not subject to the Rwandan policy. But the broader point is this. She takes a different reading of the judgment than I do. There's been an extensive and exhaustive analysis of the legal claims brought against the government, and the court has been pretty emphatic on the legality of the policy. It's concluded that the scheme is compliant with our ECHR obligations and with our refugee obligations.
John Whittingdale. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I tell my rightful friend that a few months ago I visited Hope Hostel in Kigali, where not only was the accommodation of a high standard, but the Rwandans I spoke to expressed their hope that those coming would in due course obtain jobs and move out to their own homes, thus allowing more refugees to come and take their place. So does she not agree that this policy is not just lawful, it is also humane, in that it offers refugees a real hope?
Absolutely, and he is reiterating a point which is extensively dealt with in the body of the judgment, and I refer honourable members to that judgment, where there's a complete analysis of the exact kind of support that people will receive when they're in Rwanda, the kind of monitoring that will go on to ensure that their welfare is safeguarded, and the track record that Rwanda has demonstrated in supporting refugees from the region in previous instances.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's frustrating to stand here and listen to the Secretary of State, because none of us are denying that it's a legal ruling, but whether or not it is lawful, this plan is immoral, ineffective and incredibly costly for taxpayers. Instead of wasting taxpayers' money defending a policy through the courts, does the Secretary of State not agree that the government should be focusing on stopping these dangerous crossings and tackling the smugglers and trafficking by providing more safe and legal routes and sanctuary for refugees, rather than dealing with the problem after people arrive here? Deal with it at source so they are never put in the position where they take the dangerous crossing across the channel.
Home Secretary.
Well, as the justices make clear at the beginning of their judgment, they're not opining on the politics or the morality of the Rwanda scheme. They are simply opining on the lawfulness, and that's why I have huge confidence in the judgment that's just been handed down today. But if we're talking about the broader issues, I mean, I gently disagree with the honourable lady, as you would imagine. I think what's actually unacceptable is that her party is peddling a mistruth to the British people. It's saying that we can have an unlimited and open borders policy, and we have unlimited capacity, and everybody's welcome. Unfortunately, the reality is that is not the case, and we have to take a pragmatic, measured and compassionate approach to our migration, and that's what's sensible and required by the British people.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, central to solving the crisis of illegal migration is the prevention of further loss of human life in the English Channel. So not only do I welcome today's judgment, but my right honourable friend's commitment in her statement to deliver the Rwanda partnership at scale and as soon as possible. But it is clear that there will be continued legal challenges to it, either on an individual basis or on a whole policy basis. So can I push the Home Secretary further on the point made by my right honourable friend for Stone, that the legislation coming in the new year that I look forward to supporting really must include a notwithstanding clause to ensure that we can prevent that loss of further human life in the Channel?
What's essential is that we introduce, consider and pass legislation that will be robust and resilient and actually deliver upon our stated political objectives. That will require an exhaustive analysis of the legal methods, but simply put, we're in the process, we're in the sausage machine, as they would put it, so it's not a pretty sight, but nothing is off the table.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary said over the weekend that she is considering leaving the European Convention on Human Rights in order to prevent people claiming asylum. Is it possible, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to do this without breaking our commitments in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement?
I think what's clear is that there are evident challenges with the way in which international conventions and agreements relating to migration are working in the 21st century. I think there are legitimate questions that at the international level all nation states are grappling with. I've seen that firsthand when I've spoken to my counterparts at the Calais Group or other international partners. There is an unprecedented scale of illegal migration. There is unprecedented pressure on domestic resources. And I think looking at how we can forge a new set of agreements to work better together is definitely a reasonable approach.
So Desmond Sway. Were more safe and legal routes to be made available, they would quickly be taken up, and the trade in small boats would then continue unabated, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Home Secretary clarify for the House, if someone arrives on the shores at Dover to claim asylum, in order to be able to join a child, a spouse, or an elderly parent here in the United Kingdom, right to family life, can she assure the House that that individual would not be put on a plane to Rwanda and separated from their family for the rest of their lives?
The reality is that anybody arriving here irregularly will be eligible for consideration. We will consider every case on its individual merits. We have excluded families from the scheme, but we will also ensure that the decisions are made on a lawful and rational basis.
Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the ruling today and the comments of the Home Secretary, and it's quite clear from what we're hearing from members opposite that there's a great gulf between their views and the vast majority of the British people. Overwhelmingly, my constituents want to see the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister's proposals implemented as quickly as possible. In particular, there is genuine concern about the speed of processing the many cases, and although additional staff are being taken on, the pitiful number of cases they're dealing with on a weekly basis needs to be dramatically improve. Can my right honourable friend assure me that action is being taken to ensure that happens?
Secretary.
Processing asylum claims is one core element of solving the challenge more broadly, and that's why it's right that we're increasing the number of caseworkers, increasing their specialism, streamlining the process, because ultimately we want to bear down on the numbers of people.
Not small boats that people should be scared.
The Home Secretary for her statement today and responding to questions for over 50 minutes, and we're now moving on to the next statement, which is on the Convention on Biodiversity.